Shabbat Shalom. Do you hear that the president was in Israel this week? You watch some of the proceedings? See some of those clips on TV? See his speech yesterday in Jerusalem? It was an amazing visit, really, in many unprecedented ways. Beyond the headlines and the politics of the moment, the president's 3 days in Israel were truly remarkable. Whether any substantial political progress will come out of it is another matter, but just to take it all in was an amazing experience. Honestly, I'm a sucker for non-Jews expressing affection for Jews. I admit it. With me, it's first a question, do you understand what I'm going through? After that, I can listen to whatever you have to say. I confess that emotionally, I lose it when an American president comes to the state of Israel and says that he identifies with the story of the people of Israel. Call me naive, call me innocent, I fall for it every time. I think that this characterizes most Israelis as well, and explains the huge outpouring of emotions that just didn't stop. Like the Mississippi River, it just kept rolling along every day, wave after wave of emotional gratification. I admit, when the President of the United States speaks Hebrew to me, I am his, emotionally. Do you know how hard we try to convince American Jews that Hebrew is important? Among the many phrases that he used in Hebrew were, Tov lihiyot shuv ba'aretz, which means it's good to be back in Israel, but it sounds so much better in Hebrew. Lanetzach, which means forever, as in the Jewish state is here forever, and the United States will be forever by your side. And that sounds so much better in Hebrew, said in Israel. Atem lo levad, which means you're not alone. To say that you're not alone in Hebrew is to soothe the most sensitive nerve of fear and vulnerability that resides in every Jew and in every Israeli. Really, at our most basic level, what Jews in general and Israelis in particular want is to be loved. And if not loved, at least understood. Tell us that you love us. Tell us that you understand us. Tell us that you admire us. Tell us that you identify with us. It's so lonely out there in the Middle East. Decade after decade, war after war, one little island of tolerance in a sea of anti-Western hostility, being criticized, attacked, blacklisted, boycotted by some of our soulmates, fellow Democrats and liberal thinkers and activists. Remind us the week before Passover that you, the African-American president of the United States, has an annual Seder in the White House because you resonate to the Jewish story of freedom, that it has impacted on your own understanding of yourself. This morning, President Obama laid a stone from the Martin Luther King Memorial on the grave of Yitzhak Rabin. Tell us all of these things, and we can listen to any critique you want to convey. After all, anything you dish out to us will pale in comparison to the ferocity of our own self-critique. But if you start with Israel should do this and Israel should do that without conveying that you understand the unique context of Israel within the unique context of the millennial Jewish story, for better or for worse, most Israelis will just tune you out. At least they will consider you naive. Beyond that, they will suspect your true intentions. That's what happened during the first 4 years of the Obama presidency. How is it that Obama's approval ratings were something like 4% in Israel, and 78% of American Jews voted for him? Well, If upon your inauguration you go to Cairo, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and speak about Israel, but bypass actually coming to Israel and speaking to Israelis directly, and in front of Arab and Muslim crowds convey the impression that Israel was founded because of the Holocaust, entirely skipping 3,000 years of Jewish history, Jewish yearning, Jewish dreams, and Jewish aspirations. And if, as a result, you convey the impression that it is the Arabs who are the natives in the land and that they must pay the price for European savagery and Jews are usurpers in Muslim lands, a narrative that is an inversion of history, it's the opposite of history, forget it. You'll find a 4% approval rate among Israeli Jews. That was the breakthrough this week. It starts with emotional intelligence that makes political intelligence possible. This morning at Yad Vashem, the president said, "The state of Israel does not exist because of the Holocaust, but with the survival of a strong Jewish state of Israel, such a Holocaust will never happen again." These are the words, and these are the sentiments that Israelis were yearning to hear because it is the truth. Don't simply read the headlines or read a few stories from the morning newspapers or simply focus on a few paragraphs in that amazing speech in Jerusalem yesterday. Look at the totality of this meticulously planned trip and hear what the President of the United States actually said and see what he actually did. Of course he had political objectives. He's a politician. We want politicians to be good at politics. I know that he was buttering us up, and I'm willing to be buttered. But I wish that I could convince American Jews to be as passionate about the founding principles of Israel as the president. He articulated the central principles of Zionism better than many Jews would. So many American Jews are weakening under the withering intellectual assault of opinion shapers and can no longer stand firmly by Israel's side, let alone utter the word Zionism. Listen to what Obama said as he stepped off the plane. The founding of the Jewish state of Israel was a rebirth, a redemption, unlike any in history. I walk in the historic homeland of the Jewish people. He visited Theodor Herzl's grave today and laid a wreath to the honor of the founder of Zionism. It was Herzl who wrote, "The Maccabees will rise again. We shall live at last as free men in our own soil. The world will be liberated by our freedom. Whatever we attempt there for our own benefit, will redound mightily and beneficially to the good of all mankind." Among the more interesting pictures of the week were those where the president greeted Miss Israel. Did you happen to see that? Go online. Not that I think that beauty pageants have very many redeeming qualities, I don't. But I did find the picture of Miss Israel and President Obama interesting. She is an Ethiopian immigrant who was destitute and orphaned at the age of 10 and arrived in Israel on one of those rescue waves of the Jewish Agency, partially funded by you. This is modern Israel. And even the speech yesterday to 2,000 Israelis, among them some 600 or 700 young Israeli college students, was much richer, much deeper, and more nuanced than you'll read in the morning papers or catch in a video clip. Go online and watch the speech and read the full text. It was not only about a heckler, who, by the way, was an Arab Israeli student from Haifa who was upset at Obama's articulation of his Zionist commitment. That's why he heckled him. Only an American president could have given that speech. No other Western leader could have said what President Obama said. He spoke about Israel's high-tech miracle, the birthplace of so many technologies that have changed the way people live. He spoke about how Israeli medical technology is saving people's lives around the world. He mentioned that Israel developed some of the technology that is now on the Mars rover. He spoke about the thriving Israeli civil society, its vibrant democracy, and its free press. He spoke about the youthful, energetic, innovative, out-of-the-box spirit of Israel. And he spoke this in front of the whole entire world. Can you imagine how the president's speech went down in the countries of what was once so quaintly called the Arab Spring? He spoke about how Israel can be a hub of innovation in the entire Middle East. How do you think the Muslim Brotherhood reacted to that? They exploded in self-righteous anger and ignorant indignation. 70,000 Syrians and counting are butchered, as thousands of Iraqis are still being massacred, as Iranians are further repressed, as Egyptians seem further away than ever from true democracy, as Lebanon is held hostage by a terrorist movement called Hezbollah, or Obama portrayed Israel as an island of sanity, civility, and freedom in a very sick and troubled Middle East. He spoke about the commonality of values between Israel and the United States and emphasized that Americans identify with Israel not primarily because of overlapping political interests, but because they see in Israelis a version of themselves. He said, while Jews achieved extraordinary success in many parts of the world, the dream of true freedom finally found its fullest expression in the Zionist idea to be a free people in your own homeland. Come on, I've preached these very words here for the last 8 years, and every time I say these things, I get blowback from American Jews who, for some reason, find this idea offensive. And a word about what received the most attention, that passage of the speech that dealt with the moribund peace process. Of course, being a politician, the president knew that this would receive most of the attention, and he wanted it to. First, it is important to remember that as no other leader but an American president could have given that speech, no other audience in the Middle East could have heard that speech and applauded in agreement, even when it expressed criticism of the host country. Because while there are many millions of people, good people, in the Arab world, they would not be able to hear the truth about Israel's legitimacy and extraordinary success. It is so contrary to the lies that they have been fed for decades. And in any case, no Arab leader would have allowed their people to hear such truths. But beyond that, I could quibble with some of the implications of the speech that by asking Israelis to consider the world through Palestinian eyes, it might appear to some that it is the Israelis who are resistant in equal measure to the Palestinians. That's not true. Overwhelmingly, Israelis support a two-state solution, not only in principle, but based on the Clinton parameters. That it is the Palestinians who have rejected 2 Israeli peace proposals based on these parameters, and still they're not even prepared to enter into the negotiations and come around the negotiating table. I could quibble with that. I could quibble with the impression that may have been created as if there is no outside world to contend with. There's no turmoil in the Arab world. Recognizing Israel is further away than ever. That revolutions will usher in years of instability. As if there is no crisis in Syria and no imminent threat of the use and proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. That the overwhelming issue now for Israel and the entire Middle East is Iran. I could quibble with many other unstated implications. However, it is undeniably true that to bridge the difference between people, they must consider the world through the other's eyes. And it is good for a friend of Israel and a friend of the Jews to remind us of this. Those principles come from Judaism. They are rooted in our tradition. We taught that to the world. It is undeniably true that the status quo imposes hardships on the Palestinians. The fences and other security measures were built because of their suicidal murder of Israelis, but still, they impose hardships on the population. It's good to remember that from time to time. It's also undeniably true that there is only one game in town, some variation of the original Oslo peace process. Neither the Israelis nor the Palestinians are going anywhere. This was understood as far back as Menachem Begin in the 1970s and was adopted as policy by successive Israeli governments, both of the right and of the left. And here's my final word. I personally do not see prospects of a quick resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Perhaps there are interim agreements that can be reached that will ease the pain on all sides and push the process forward. We progressives are often better at imagining possibility than we are in recognizing the limitations of possibility. That characterizes the liberal mindset. Our dreams of reality often overleap the reality of reality. We can talk a good game, but talk is often cheap for us. We are 2 oceans removed from the smell of gunpowder and burning flesh. I'm not a politician, nor a diplomat, nor a political analyst. I could be wrong. I don't think so. But who knows? After all, Sadat appeared in Israel out of the blue one fine day. And the Oslo Accords, too, hit the world like a thunderclap. Even the Clinton administration didn't know of the agreement until after it was drafted by Israeli and Palestinian negotiators. It just appeared one fine day. I don't see this happening. But if it does, I would be the first to celebrate how wrong I was. Here's the point for us. Until a permanent settlement is reached, we just have to hang on and stay strong, physically and ideologically and politically. But in fighting dragons, we must be careful not to become dragons ourselves. And all the while, we must constantly probe for openings to peace. Keep the process moving and the channels open. And let us remember our fundamental values. We will always be on the side of the peacemakers. We will always stand for dignity, decency, mutual respect, democracy, and peace. We will always stand with those who elevate the sanctity of life over the sanctity of land. That's what the season teaches us. B'chol dor v'dor chayav adam lir'ot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim. In every generation, every Jew must feel as if they were personally redeemed from Egypt. Every Jew must feel the yearning for freedom, not only for ourselves, but for the world entire. No Jew can ever lose hope for peace, and no Jew can ever stop working for peace. Amen. We turn